everybody. James Yeager and Jacob Herman back here in Tad Response. Thank you for listening, watching, whatever it is you're doing. We appreciate you guys. We're continuing on with part 4 of Grain Mills Don't Shit Bread. I guess that's going to be the name of it. I guess we might as well just call it that, right?
I think so. I think a lot of people are going to be like, what? Until they figure out, like, go try to use it.
All right. So next is Survival Library. And so I think that we all know that as Jacob's talked all this knowledge, I think that we can get ourselves another month ahead by having some stuff in the library. One of the things I've already mentioned, or some of them, is Where There Is No Doctor and Where There Is No Dentist. I think those are great medical books to have. Also, the Physician's Desk Reference is good.
A doctor's better. A doctor.
Okay.
He doesn't think I'm funny right now.
And Ditch Medicine by Hugh Coffey. I think it's a great book, and of course others. So besides medical stuff, what are the kind of books, like a Farmer's Almanac? What do you recommend?
I think it's actually harder now. Just so, because the internet people write less. So if we're talking, and I'm a big fan of hard books.
Yeah.
Like
that's what I'm talking
physical
about.
books.
I'm talking about books.
So if you are going to have a homestead, right? There is, so just a starter, like a good starter library. 101 Bushcraft Kills by Dave Canterbury.
Okay.
If you have a Tractor Supply in your area, they have a bookshelf.
Buy some of that.
It's a great way to start. So you need a Ball Blue Book canning manual, right? And the older, the better. Mine's from the 40s, and the first recipe is canned rabbit, and it says killed rabbit. Ball canning manual.
You don't want to can them live, right?
No. This Foxfire series of books, which is written about Appalachian culture, and gives you if you'll read it, you'll be like, damn, I didn't know people. It's really not a how-to, it's a how people lived. And you'll be like, like there's a section about sitting up with the dead. You take the door off the frame, tie the dead person to it, cover them with a sheet, keep rigor mortis from setting in, right? And then you'd have your funeral. Little stuff like that. The stories guides to raising sheep, stories guides to raising chickens, story guide to raising rabbits. When I was like a kid in 4-H and was getting into agriculture and getting into rabbits and chickens and stuff, grade A, story guide to raising pigs. If you buy those books and you read it from cover to cover once or twice, you could theoretically go get a chicken, and the chicken would live and be successful. What else is a great book to have? A book on knots.
Yeah,
I've got a book on knots that you won't use until you need to use it.
Boy Scout manual.
Older Boy Scout manual. My dad's Boy Scout. Any Boy Scout manual from the 60s to early 70s, where they actually talked about guns and shooting and fire and skinning stuff.
Yep.
So early Boy Scout manual is good to go.
A couple other areas I think you should have some books. And we're going to talk about some other stuff in a minute, but there's going to be some, especially in the winter, there's going to be some time to fill. And so fictional books or other books like encyclopedias or something for people to read, hopefully to gain knowledge, but to fill time and to provide some enjoyment. Also, school books for children. My daughter homeschools, so we got a kind of a head start on what works for that, right. But everybody's going to be homeschooling, and so you have to continue the education of the children. Luckily, we'll be able to leave out all the bullshit and start teaching them math again.
I'm a book guy, right? Like, I don't sound like it. I sound like a redneck, but I'm a reader, and most people don't read. And if you don't read, you should find something and start reading. If you, once again, I say all these things because I'm not like a sports guy, but instead of you sitting on your ass watching a sports ball game, if you read a book once a month, you'd be a lot farther ahead than all the other guys that watch the football games. And right now, classical literature is really cheap as people downsize their homes. If you have if you are on your retreat, or you live at your place, or you have a place to go, there's no reason not to have a fairly extensive library. And that was always, a library was always a sign of an educated or wealthier individual, because books are expensive. There is a series of books, and it's the 100 great classics, or 100 great hits, or whatever they called it, and they sold it. Traveling Salesman sold it from the late 1800s up through the teens. And in theory, if you read all 100 books, and I think it's 100, maybe 50, you had the basis of a classical education. So you could read all these books and include poetry, philosophy, Latin, the Odyssey, right? And you would have the equivalent to a classical college education in the 1800s. And that's what that books was, where you could school yourself at home. I myself am working through the complete works of Churchill. So not reading, people used to read, and cowboys used to be able to quote poetry.
Well, people read every day. They read a paragraph about something on Snapchat or Instagram, and they might be reading a lot of hours of their day, but they're not reading anything that provides real educational value. Even some fiction books at least have a complete story, or something like that. So
right, but having a library of both fiction and work-related manuals. If you went into a home, if you go into a homestead, or like an English manor house, they had a library, right? And books were expensive. So in that library are a lot of books about farming, because the people on the farm would use the books from the library a lot of times. You'd find books in there about how to repair stuff or how to build stuff, or the patents, and it would show diagrams of stuff that were made, where we do it digitally now, and you can look at it and you're like, you can look at old patent drawings and be like, that's how they made a hay rake.
Right.
Have some working knowledge of stuff, which I think we're just missing as a society. But any kind of books. Also, if you live, most states have a extension agency as part of their agricultural. Like at the University of Tennessee has the UT Ag Agency, which is 4-H. Those offices that run 4-H are the Ag Extension Agency, and they also have literature and pamphlets about growing food in your area and what to grow and what soil you're using, and you can go there and get free literature, your extension office, about how to survive.
Yep, cool. I'd also suggest throwing the most detailed road atlas you can find in your library. And it, the newer the better. He's talking about some stuff, the older the better. I'm talking about newer the better. A road atlas is I believe going to be a good piece of.
A big one.
Yeah, big one. Brand McNally, big. The bigger, the more detailed that you can get. I don't mean a folding map. I mean, if that's what you got, that's what you got. But as much as you can, there's tons of information. But when you're trying to plot out how far you got to go to get something, that's gonna really help you out. So cabin fever is
real.
Is a real thing, and a lot of settlers wound up murdering their wives.
I bet.
A lot of that was going on. And so we have a friend, Ken Hackathorn, and Ken has moved up to Idaho, and he shoots a lot. And he shoots so he can reload. He said, James, he says, first I start with, I'm making this up, with the 44, then I load the 38s and 327s, and then the 9mm, and then I still want to kill my wife. So basically his little reloading room, I'm joking, his little reloading room is what he does in the winter, because they get snowed in a lot, to help him get through it without kind of going crazy. And so cabin fever is a real thing, and luckily Tennessee doesn't get that cold that we would have to be like locked in the house.
You're not in a line cabin.
Say again?
You're not in a line cabin.
Yeah.
Also, the diet had a lot to play with that.
Yeah, and that's just another thing I was going to bring up. The lack of a variety of foods. Probably women started canning so their husband wouldn't murder them. Probably.
Yeah, people take it for granted, but like your average cowboy could quote poetry and play chess.
Yeah. Right.
Like.
Yeah. Like I mean, like the book about the movie about the OK Corral with Val Kilmer, and he's speaking Latin. What's the name of that damn movie? Tombstone. Yeah, and he's speaking Latin. That's completely.
Most people spoke Latin, as most educated people spoke Latin.
Completely fathomable.
I had a friend that wasn't allowed to graduate from MBA because he couldn't pass Latin. He had to graduate from Hillsborough. high school.
Oh,
Because
wow.
you still have to take Latin, which I think they should still teach as part of people might be less stupid.
I don't know if a language makes you smarter, but you know. But also think about old school board games. You know, Monopoly. No, that starts a lot of fights. You know, how about Risk? That takes like 5 months to play, so that would be a good one.
Battleship.
Risk.
We've been playing
Settlers.
We've been playing Settlers of Catan. Just stuff to, and we're looking at really long term. You're right. The winters here aren't as bad, and honestly, different levels of, like, you can have all the stuff in the world, like all the food, the generator, all that shit, and then you're just sitting there.
Yeah.
Like, if your entire life revolves around buying stuff to prep and watching Amazon, when Amazon cuts out, you're gonna be like, Like, I've been like watching these guys carve spoons and thinking about taking up spoon carving in my, like, out on the porch. Like, you know, guys carve. It was a big thing, wood carving. You'd see a lot of handmade toys and stuff. Just the more stuff you do with your hands, the better off you are.
Yep. All that. I mean, that's all for real. So let's talk about caches, offsite storage. Let's talk about that kind of stuff. I've made videos about it, but I have several caches in several different places. And what are your thoughts, and what are your priorities for a cache?
Man, I'm back and forth. Right? Like there's only, I don't know. I think that, like, mostly big people think about it as guns, right?
Yeah.
I think most people don't have enough food to store enough to store offsite.
Right.
Does that make sense? Like, like you could, if you are putting cash together for, like, you need to E&E back to, say, I'm going from Memphis to Knoxville. It's a long way. You might have some spots along the way that you stuff some MREs or a bag of rice, or, you know, do it like the Vietnam style, right? But I don't think most people are advanced enough to be like, okay, we're gonna put a cache out here that's got rifles and handguns. You know, everybody's got a gun stored, you know, someplace or another. But I think that's a really advanced topic. And as far as, like, storing food, I think that's a whole different realm of, like, if you've got a cave or you've got a place,
Right.
a well house or a off-site root cellar,
Right.
that's what people used to do to have some food out of the house in case the house burns. But I think a lot of people don't have that, and then they get wrapped around this idea of hiding stuff,
Right.
and it kind of takes away from their idea of, like, we should focus on the preps that we immediately need.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. For the sake of it, you've already mentioned in case the house burns down, and that could also include a tornado or whatever the case may be. I have some stuff at some different places with people that if something happened, I'm fine if they wind up eating it. You know what I'm saying? Like, it wouldn't bother me. So let's talk about gardening. My daughter, as I mentioned earlier, she has started a master gardening class. She actually just finished it, and she's gotten into gardening, and she's also the hunter. She got her hunting license this year, and she's starting hunting. My son-in-law is doing neither of those two things. But anyway, I'm joking around. He's not. But gardening. So people buy these bug out seed packs or whatever the case may be, and so I'm going to just kind of zoom out for a second, Jacob, and I'm going to talk, and then you can counterpoint or tell me where I'm wrong. So let's look at something happens right now, whatever today is, when you're listening, whatever day or month it is, something happens right now. I think you need enough stored food to last several months. And what I mean by that is, the way I look at it is, I think you need on hand, like, at least about 30 days of the food you eat all the time, you know, ramen noodles and ravioli or whatever that is. And then I think you need probably at least 5 months worth of pretty good food. You know, you got some Mountain House, maybe your MREs and stuff like that. And then if we really had to stretch it out, that's where, and with those MREs and with those those Mountain House meals or whatever, we're also having beans and rice. We're not just going to go right to beans and rice as our only source of food. We would make those other foods to last longer by serving them with beans and rice. But that lasts maybe 5 or 6 months of a 1 year cycle is going to be like, whatever your base preps are, beans and rice. Okay. So that would be a sucky 6 months. So let's say that's you have 1 year's worth of food. Somewhere in there, you're going to have a garden and some hunting. And so gardening and hunting, after a year or after however many months you got, like if you were lucky enough to have something happen and have enough food to last till spring, if you had already been gardening and already learned how to can and already knew how to hunt and smoke that meat or cure that meat in some way, you might be able to get through the next winter. But Jacob, what do you see as a 12-month to 24-month zoom out big plan? Like, what do you see? How much food do they need to have? How much food do they need to be able to?
I think that if you're really putting a plan together, you should plan to have a year of stored food.
Right.
Solid. Like you're going to eat out of storage. Right. And that could get monotonous, but you've got to be prepared for crop failure. Yep. And if you're not gardening now,
right,
the likelihood that your garden will be successful is 0.
Yeah.
Like just rolling the dice, like probability.
Well, here's what's funny. I'll come back and report on this. And Shelton, you can remind me. My daughter just finished her master gardening thing. She's just in the last few months gotten a little greenhouse, and she's just beginning. So I want to revisit this at the end of the season with her, and see how year 1 went for her. And I think it'd be a good follow up to this.
There's a lot of prep. Right, so she's probably going to put the prep in too, right?
She is, yeah.
So you're going to find where she's going to have a garden spot somewhere nearby.
She's got a greenhouse. She's doing seedlings. She does have a garden spot nearby.
Okay, and then you're going to have somebody come with a tractor and prepare it.
That's happening soon,
right?
Yeah,
and then it's going to be bringing the load of shit to put on top of it, right? So the problem is that's the preparation that most people don't have, right? And then you've got that. You've got the garden spot that you need to and doing it by hand is hard.
Yeah.
So if you do it every year, your ground's kind of prepared, right?
Right.
But if you're like all of a sudden like, hey, a disaster hits, I'm going to break open my can of seeds and we're going to go out back and we're going to prepare a garden by hand.
Yep.
You are talking back-breaking labor.
Yep. Turn in with a shovel.
Right. And so then your bigger issue is if you have to grow enough in a garden to put up for 4 people. Right. It will take all of your seeds this year to grow enough plants to make enough seeds for next year.
Right.
Does that make you can't eat it?
Yeah. Right. And we can get into all the seeds that won't reproduce and the heirloom
genetically
seed.
but you should store genetically modified ungenetically modified seeds, and because like our grandparents used to save seeds and they'd save those seeds for next year's crop.
I don't know how many times I spit watermelon seeds into a mason jar for my grandma. Do you remember stuff like that?
Right.
Yeah. So, so heirloom seeds are what you want to save. Hybrid seeds lose viability as much as 75% of reproduce after a year. So it's worth basically nothing. Heirloom plants are harder to grow and are very region specific. So heirloom plants aren't as hardy as the hybrid seeds, but they will grow if you. So when you buy this seed bank with 5,000 different kinds of plants in it, probably only a handful of those plants will actually grow where you are.
Yeah, that goes back to going to your extension office and finding out where. And that's what Heather's learning about in the class, like different temperate zones.
Yep.
There are tomatoes that will grow in Camden that will not grow in Johnson City, that will not grow in Memphis.
No, Heather, I helped her find a spot. I said, does this look okay? She said, it doesn't matter how it looks. I got to do a soil sample.
Right.
And so I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
Well, that's okay.
Yeah. exactly. That goes back to a lot of. I think a lot of people in their head, they have a garden. They live in the suburbs, and they have a garden in their backyard that they make their fresh green salad out of.
Oh yeah, and my daughter's been composting for over a year now.
Right. Let's talk about like what a real garden looks like.
Okay.
So I would say that 15 to 20 50-foot rows of pole beans.
You guys, pole beans, but how long is a row?
50 feet long.
Okay, go ahead.
And so say 15 to 20 of those.
Right.
Right. I would say that then this is like, I'm thinking just on like let's just say 4 adults.
Uh-huh.
A quarter to a half acre potato patch.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're talking some substantial dirt.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think most people in suburban areas, if they put their entire yard in a lot,
mm-hmm.
if they put their entire yard in a garden,
mm-hmm.
that wouldn't produce enough feed for 2 people for a year.
Right. Right.
I don't think people, when you don't have inputs, I don't think people understand the level of area it takes.
Yep.
And that's why like people grow they grew like the three sisters. You got squash, corn, and beans. They grow them all together, mm-hmm. and we're going to have to learn to grow stuff like that again, because the production agriculture you're going to go back to getting 12 bushels of corn per acre
mm-hmm. with
a mule. You got to figure out to get the mule. If you're doing it by hand, you might be able to get 2 bushels for
mm-hmm.
an acre, because you're planting it all by hand, like back-breaking work.
Yep. Yeah, it's tough. So let's say you do get this garden going, and let's say you have a surplus, because you're eating as you go too, but you have a surplus, and so now we got to do something with that, and a lot of times that means canning.
Yeah,
canning is a big deal. It requires fuel for the fire, all those things that go into it. And I'm not a canner by any means, but that's another skill that Heather is going to learn from Marilyn. Marilyn learned it from her mom, and she's going to pass that down to Heather. And something I'll tell you guys right now about canning is you can can food that somebody else made. You don't have to have a garden to start canning right now. Okay, you can go to the farmer's market or even the grocery store, and you can can stuff that you buy off a shelf. You can, and a lot of people don't know this. You can can and then store on a shelf, a non-temperature controlled shelf, meat. Just like you mentioned the rabbit earlier, and so canning is another one of those near lost arts, and luckily we got somebody here that can help us. But what are your thoughts on canning or other ways to store food?
Canning is the best way to do it, but you need to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right, and it's once again like you will die of the bubonic plague.
Right.
Literally.
Yeah.
Right. Pressure cookers are dangerous.
Yep.
If you went back in like your local newspaper, you will see stories of people's houses that blew up and people that were maimed from a pressure cooker.
Yeah.
So you need to learn how to use it. You need to learn how to can. And there's a lot of like, I'm a big fan of the ball canning manual and then doing some research prior, but canning is the number one way to do,
Yeah.
To preserve food, canning and salting. And if you don't have, there's only so much you can do in the suburbs, right?
Yeah.
There's literally, I think this goes back to what you're preparing for and where you're living.
Right.
Right. If you're living in the suburbs, right?
Yep.
It don't matter what we're talking about, because you can't grow enough food or you keep that food secure.
Right.
Right. Like
right.
You're screwed. You're talking about being able to hunker down for a week or 2 weeks, but your house is not designed for
hunkering down,
and you don't have a water supply.
Right.
So unless you have a place to go that is 60 miles or more, and you have an area of land with a water supply that you can collect firewood off of, you're not. Where are you going to go get the wood to build the fire to can? Because those woods are owned by somebody, and you're not coming to take my wood.
Yep.
That goes by. You know what I mean?
It becomes a commodity.
It becomes a commodity, and I think that once we reach a certain level of this discussion, like when we're talking about gardening and putting up food during an apocalypse, now you could start gardening now and put up some food this year and next year and start rotating it out, and you could build for free with just jars and labor a couple of year rotating food supply over the next 2 years.
Yep.
You know, and
how long does food last on the shelf?
I've ate canned stuff that's 4 years old,
right?
5 years old. It's home canned.
Yeah.
And then I think the various like products, the various like canned goods like ravioli and chili and stuff. That stuff all lasts three plus years.
Oh yeah, I bet it lasts longer than that.
Probably longer than that. And if you were hungry, you would eat it.
And what happens, folks, for food? It doesn't become dangerous after it expires. It starts losing caloric value. So it might fill your stomach. It might taste good, but it won't keep you going
unless it's dented. The can's dented, and in like a home can, if it's popped up, it's dangerous.
Yeah. And pretty much if it stinks, don't eat it. That's
right.
Just general stuff. Along that line, I just bought an Excalibur dehydrator. You said you confirmed my research. It was the best one to get, made in America, but the best style.
Right.
And I've learned a little bit about dehydrating stuff. You can't just throw it in there. You got it. Sometimes it's got to be prepped or pre-cooked or steamed or whatever the case may be. But you can make your own jerky, and you can dry your own vegetables. And the one of the advantages to doing this is it reduces the size of the vegetable, kind of like the beans we were talking about, rehydrating them earlier. Reduces the size so you can store more in a smaller space. And so I know a lot of people that live like in the suburbs. You have a space issue, or if your wife's not really on board with your prepping paranoia, you have to come up with some way to do stuff. I know guys that underneath their house in the crawl space they have filled with tubs of things they're storing, and it's not a horrible place.
Cool basements, cool, dry. A lot of people, it goes back to the suburb thing. Like, I think that at some point you have to make a decision on what you're doing. There are a lot of places you can store stuff in your house. Say you live in Gwinnett County in Atlanta, or you live in Bellevue in Nashville, or Lebanon, or Murfreesboro, or even the rural areas of those counties. There's too many people.
Yeah.
You could have 4 years worth of food in your home in the suburbs. You will never last long enough to eat that 4 years of food, and you do not have the ability to move that much food without a big truck and then security for the big truck. Like at some point you're stockpiling more than your situation allows. That's like it'd be like having 10 million rounds of ammo in Vietnam, and all the rest of the Americans have left.
Right.
You can't shoot it all.
Right.
So a little bit of it, when you get past, like, houses now are not meant to operate on not HVAC.
Right.
They're not meant to operate on not pressurized water.
Right.
And when you lose those things, your ability to maintain life at that life support system, which is your current suburban home, is diminished. You cannot build a fire because you do not have a fireplace. You'll probably die of carbon monoxide poisoning. There's nowhere to put one.
Yep.
You can't heat it. It's not made to be heated like that.
Right.
So the storage and the amount of stuff you're storing, really at some point it becomes moot.
Right.
Yeah. And so if we're getting into that, you need to move to a rural area and have a root cellar and use it. Can stuff. Running out and learning to can during the apocalypse probably not going to work out that great. You're going to lose a lot of food because you're going to get it too hot or too cold, blah, 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 blah. Start canning now. If you put in a garden this spring, or you go to the store and buy veggies at the farmer's market, you could put up 40 or 50 quarts of various goods, and that's a good month and a half supply. And then next summer you put another 40 or 50 up, and you start eating them, and before long you have a cupboard of food. You've built a 6 month to a year supply of canned goods at home. But this is not stuff you learn on the fly. It's you implement it now. It's like training to shoot your gun. You can now.
Right. Exactly. So besides the house there used to be things called a spring house and a smoke house.
Right.
What were those?
So a spring house was built over the spring. It was cold. Water comes out of the ground at 55 degrees, just like a cave. 52 degrees, something like that. And you'd store your milk, your cream, stuff like that in the spring house. That was your refrigerator.
In the smokehouse?
It was where you smoked your meat.
but like what is a? I mean, describe a smokehouse.
So if you take different people use smokehouse for different stuff. So you can take like strips of beef and put them in a smokehouse and dry them, right? Or you can take salted pork like a ham. Like we would take a salted ham, like a country ham, put it in salt and cure it. Then pull that ham out of the salt and hang it in the smokehouse for flavor. So a smokehouse is a building that you fill with smoke and it's got the right ventilation to let the smoke out, but you smoke and dry and cure meat in there.
And spring house. So a spring house would be harder to have nowadays. A smokehouse would be pretty easy to build, but a spring house,
right? Finding a spring goes back to like that's when I look at a piece of property like having a spring is like top priority, and you may have to walk to get to the spring because if you look at if you're driving around and you see an old antebellum home or a home from the 1800s,
there's a spring there.
There's a little doghouse looking thing somewhere, and that's the spring.
Yeah, all of them. Yeah, that was a thing for sure. So, so just for those listening that might not understand some of the jargon, he's said MREs a few times, and that's a meal ready to eat, is a pre-prepared food that they give soldiers, and like one bag of it is one meal for one soldier, and so as we talk about these things, MREs, while they're great, they are really bulky and they're really expensive. And so if you're going to do some stuff ahead of time, I suggest MREs being a part of your preps because it's something you can eat. Like right now, if a hurricane hits your house and knocks everything down, you can go through the rubble, grab an MRE out, and it's a self-contained meal that doesn't need any help. And so I think they should be part of it, but basically my plan is 72 hours of MREs, and so that's kind of what I got going on. So dehydration, as we mentioned first, I got that dehydrator, and but I will also encourage you to consider going to an LDS cannery, Mormon cannery. They have a bunch of foods that come in number 10 cans and cases of 6, and they're relatively inexpensive. You can get the white rice and the wheat and flour and milk and powdered milk and stuff like that. So something that's something to consider and a good way to do that. Freeze dried, we've mentioned Mountain House, and there's several.
That's really where it's at.
There's several other companies, but freeze dried, it's frozen and dried, so it takes up a little bit of room. You have to have water, a lot of water to reconstitute it, not more than you would have need anyway, but you have to put water in it so it expands back out. But it is the best tasting survival food there is. And if you go ahead.
And it's freakishly expensive.
It is expensive. That's why I said, part of my plan for a few months is to have the Mountain House. But I'm going to real quick augment it with the beans and rice, so people start getting used to eating beans and rice, so you don't just turn that on them all at once. Make those meals last longer, but they are good, and they also have besides the supper type meal stuff, they have cereals and some dessert kind of stuff, and then from other companies, Emergency Essentials and stuff like that, I've gotten freeze dried strawberries, or just instead of the meals from Mountain House, I've also got just chicken or just these other things that we can make other recipes with and stuff like that for the variety of it, because that's what it's going. We are so used to now being inundated with all these varieties of food. I mean, all these different burger places and stuff I can walk to right now and get any number of different foods. So when we go to eating 5 things in rotation, for a long time, it's gonna wear on us. And then canned food, not just the Mormon cannery stuff that I talked about, but just the regular canned food that you get at Walmart. That stuff is usually pretty cheap to get. The downside is that it's heavy and you couldn't carry it far. But in your house, you can stock up on tons of canned foods, and make sure you rotate it, and make sure that you buy a variety of stuff and start using it and trying different meals and dishes and stuff like that. But to think about like the base products, like just corn, just potatoes, just tomatoes or whatever, and start thinking about the different kinds of things that you can make with that, again, because variety is the spice of life, and it's gonna be a real thing. Anything on MREs or dehydration or anything?
Got 45 minutes or 35 minutes.
Okay.
MREs, once again, it depends on what your budget is. MREs are great, right? They're like a complete packaged emergency disaster meal. They don't require any. There's no MRE that requires cooking, does it? It's all they're all
you can
finished.
Eat them. You can eat them.
They've gotten really expensive, and unless you have a place to store them in a cooler place, like people go, oh, the MREs last what is it, 5 or 6 years? I think that's the.
Yeah, I think so.
But if you store them in the garage, they can go down to 6 months.
Yeah. So the more ready the food to eat, the more it has to be in a controlled environment.
Right. So I'm a big fan of the freeze dried stuff. I don't think it's affected by temperatures that much, is it? It's
yeah. Anything that's real food, it's prepared food, is affected. But it's but freeze dried would be affected less than the MRE because it's got no water in it. But it still would degrade faster. Jacob had to step out on the call, but I wanted to talk about fuel and fuel storage and stuff like that. You should get some lamps. You should have oil lamps, and you should make sure that you have plenty of wick and lamp oil. Get clear, unscented lamp oil that will store the longest. It stores pretty much indefinitely. But now, imagine this. I'm going to talk about gasoline and stuff like that. Where are you going to keep this stuff? Well, if you keep it in your garage, now we're using, hopefully not candles, but we're using open flames now. We're using open flames to cook. We're using open flames to light the house. And if there's a fire, oh my gosh! Now you got fuel cans in your house. I mean, and no fire department, so you might lose everything in just a minute. So you have to be really careful. You can't use all glass lamps, and you shouldn't use just an open candle, things like that. Like you just shouldn't do that. It's tough, but storing fuel, I think that you need a little bit. Even if it's, if you have a generator, you need to be able to run it. My generators, I've got Honda generators, and they are converted to handle propane. They can also run off natural gas or gasoline. I've never put gasoline in them, hoping that when I need to use them, they'll still work with gas really easy, because if you leave gas in stuff, it tends to rot lines and stuff like that. But to store fuel, or to restore fuel, like if you got a can of old gasoline, there's this stuff called Pri dash and then the letter G, Pri G for gasoline, and Pri D, Delta D, for diesel or kerosene. Those things will help renew old gasoline or protect your gasoline. Basically what happens to gasoline, and when it's stored, a gasoline has enzymes in it, and when those enzymes dissipate, then the fuel is bad. And I always thought it was funny that gas goes bad. It seems like this chemical thing that should just stay this chemical thing until the end of time, but it actually does go bad. Diesel stores better than gasoline, and it's more stable, and in the end of the world, it's probably more useful as well. And tractors run off diesel and stuff like that. K1 is kerosene, K2 is diesel. So like kerosene is like premium diesel fuel. So if you had a car that runs off diesel, you can run it off kerosene. It's more expensive, but it's like running it off premium gas. It's not good to run diesel in like a kerosene heater because it'll smoke excessively, and that's just not good. It wouldn't be good at all. So ideally, if you had the money and the resources, is a below ground fuel tank. That would be ideal, but that's probably cost prohibitive for a bunch of folks. And if you're just going to run a generator, I don't know if that makes sense or not. Above ground tanks are significantly cheaper. However, you're dealing with now, you become a target. And so I would recommend that if you're going to have some kind of above ground fuel tank, that you have some kind of disguise for it. And I don't even know what that would be, but I would think about having some kind of disguise for it. My home runs off natural gas and of course I've got water plumbed into it and electricity. And I've considered very strongly about getting a propane tank. A lot of the things I have in my house that run off gas can be converted to propane, but my generators run off propane, and having a couple of 100-gallon tank of propane out back to run generators sounds pretty good to me. I also have several propane on-demand hot water heaters and things like that. So it wouldn't be perfect, but I think I could keep hot water running in the house and stuff like that if I had that propane, at least for a while. Let's see. Lamp oil can be bought in gallon kegs. I bought off Amazon. I bought a 5-gallon keg not long ago of lamp oil. Again, clear, unscented lamp oil, and buy metal, high quality lamps, oil lamps. They're $20 to $30 a piece, and think about it this way: every person in your household will probably need their own lamp. They're going to have in their room to go to the bathroom. You're not going to give them. You're going to sit in the dark while they take yours to the outhouse or whatever the case may be. And that's another thing we got to talk about is getting rid of the waste. But that's all I want to talk about really on the fuels. But think about it. Fuel's going to be a commodity. It's going to be a trade good. It's going to be something that people wish they had when they don't have it. And waiting till the gas line's a mile long and people are shouting at each other and fighting is not a good time to start thinking about fuel storage. This is James Yeager. Jacob had to step out, but I'll say goodbye for him. James Yeager with Tactical Response, reminding you that your responsibility to be ready for the fight never ends.